Okay, so limbic resonance is really interesting to me. So what limbic resonance is we have three parts of our brain. Just like I talked about the green, yellow, red, when we're in red, we're in the fight or flight part of our brain, which is the oldest part, the reptilian kind of part of our brain. It's very much in our brainstem, from an actual brain perspective. So we've got the reptilian part of the brain, the fight or flight, the amygdala, and then we've got the limbic system, which is very much the emotional part of the brain. And then the most developed part is the prefrontal cortex, which is the outermost layer of the brain, but also at the forefront here. And the limbic system is very much how we're connected to each other socially. So if you think of how a mother's heartbeat it will sync up with her baby's heartbeat, or when you have lots of oxytocin flowing through your system, you'll sync up with the people around you. That's what limbic connection is. You can tell how you're using it every time you feel what somebody else feels at the same time. Okay? Or just how you feel around somebody else is your limbic system turning on. Okay? So you can tell a lot about a person and about yourself by paying attention to how you feel when you're around them. So if we think of really everything in the universe can be distilled down to one thing, and that's relationship. It's two different entities being in relationship with each other. And when they're in relationship with each other, there's an energy exchange. So if you think of like an ice cube going into a like cup of hot water, there's an energy exchange that happens right there, right? Like the ice starts to melt and the hot water gets a little cooler. So there's an exchange that's happening there. That's happening in our limbic systems as well. Okay? And that's what co-creation is. So when we meet somebody else and we have an exchange with them and our emotions kind of pair up, or they like butt heads, or they're meeting up together and changing in some way, and both of us come away from that experience different than we were when we first came together. Okay, so that's co-creation. And so your limbic system can be either it can be strong, or it can be stable, or it can be one or the other. So you might have a strong limbic system, but it not be very stable. So if you have a strong limbic system, but you're not really in control of it, which is what I mean by stability, then you'll take other people on your emotional ride. So we all know those people that would consider themselves kind of volatile, or maybe they don't know they're volatile, but they come into the room and they're like, wah! And we all jump on their ride with them because it's so intense. The sensation is so high, right? So they have a strong limbic system, but their limbic system may not be very stable in the sense that they don't really have control over it. Okay? Or you might have a stable limbic system where you do have a fair amount of control, or it is pretty steady, but it's not very strong. Then you go on other people's rides. Okay? From an emotional perspective. So can anybody think of an example of this that's happened recently? And so this is where you get into, I think there's such a big overlap with leadership, is because if you can learn ways to develop both a strong and a stable, because it's good to have a strong limbic system. It's a sign of leadership. And it's okay to have a weaker one too. You just want to know where you begin and where the other person begins, so that you can find different ways to have boundaries to protect yourself, right? And then boundaries are meant to be kind of like training wheels. We want to use them and then grow past them. We don't want them to be like set in stone forever. So you might have some areas where you do have to keep your boundaries pretty rigid in some places while you're learning. And then as you learn, you get more comfortable and develop the skill of holding the boundary better, then you can move that boundary out, move it out. Okay? And so we want to be able to, from a leadership perspective, it very much has to do with influence and how we're influencing. And leadership and parenting are the same thing too, right? Like we want to be able to influence and stay present and guide the emotions and consciously have them go in a way with that we want them to go, as opposed to them just like beating us up. Yeah, we want to be able to have both a strong limbic system, and that's where that volatility is good. But we also want to be stable, and that's where the more like fixed energy is good. Okay. So again, when we think of what codependency is, it means that we're going on somebody else's ride for the most part. And when it comes to setting boundaries and like the guilt that comes up around, well, if I don't caretake this person in this situation, then there'll be a negative consequence for me, right? Like, or they'll hurt, or they'll suffer, or they'll make me feel guilty. Those are the types of things that come up, right? It's like, if I don't abandon myself here, I'll eventually pay for it later. Okay, so if you look at it that way, it's still self-serving. You're still looking after that other person so that you get your needs met. So no matter how we cut it, codependency is a narcissistic trait. And this is something, again, that people who worked with me know, is that we are integrating our inner narcissists. We're in approval of that narcissism. We're even in approval of the codependent parts of us that abandon ourselves. We're in approval of all of that. We're not trying to cut things out or make things wrong or like separate ourselves from anything. We're actually trying to bring it all in so that we can consciously use it when it's actually resonant. Okay.